another episode of the Gentleman's Brotherhood. My name is Juan Sepulveda, and I am here with my good friend Tamesh Bahadur. Tamesh, how are you today?
Good evening. How are you?
Doing very good.
Wonderful.
I'm probably doing a little bit better than you right now, and I'll explain why.
Okay.
Well, tonight we chose a very interesting topic, and it's related to having effective conversations. So we were talking. We want to talk about the one up man. Anything that you can do, I can do better. Have you ever been in one of those situations where you're speaking with someone and you tell them something that happened in your with your car, and then before you're done, they're starting to tell you, "Oh no, but wait till I tell you about my car," and then they one up the conversation. They go one level more intense, or one level more tragic, or one level more successful, and it's almost like a race war. There's no beating this other individual. Does that happen to you, Tamesh?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you wonder what is going through the minds at that exact moment of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it happens and you don't notice it. Conversation keeps on flowing and you keep on, in that back and forth, telling stories and, sharing things. But there are many times where it becomes very obvious and it becomes almost like a derailment to a productive conversation. And what we want to explore is, if we are engaging in that more than necessary, how can we actually be aware of it and control it so that we can have a conversation that is more balanced, that it's more inclusive to the people that are with whom we speak? And also, if we recognize this pattern on other people, how can we have an influence on it? How can we have a positive influence on their delivery? Or how can we deal with it and not get annoyed or not get distracted or sidetracked? So, now that we know what one up or one upping is, do you have any idea why people do this?
It's something I've given some thought to. And one of the main reasons or ideas that comes to my mind as to why people do it is a feeling of insecurity. They feel like they're not accomplishing or they haven't done as much to be interesting as whatever the other party is discussing. So, to make themselves feel a little better and more secure in what they have accomplished, they say, "Oh, yeah? Well, if you've done this, I see your stake in that, and I'll raise you this." Sort of conversational poker stakes.
Hmm. And I would imagine that in for some people this happens at a subconscious level. It's not that they're really actively trying to be the winners, but it's almost pattern or a behavior. It's almost a um, this subconscious pattern that they follow. But like you say, I agree. Some of the things that I was reading, that it often stems from insecurity. In Now, there are things that can be done in order for an individual to feel less insecure or to be more confident. And we're going to have in the future more conversations specifically geared towards a man's confidence. I think it's a very important tool. It's a worthy endeavor that pays great dividends for a man to work on being confident. And um, other people can feel when a man is secure in himself, and it has a lot of positive benefits. One of them, in this case, will be uh, curbing a little bit of the one up syndrome. But what can just to throw some ideas out, what can a man do when engaged in a conversation and perhaps he's feeling insecure about whether this is a good match in the conversation, or if they have something valuable to contribute? What would you say would be some ideas that they can try to mentally tackle in order to feel more secure, more adequate in the conversation?
I think it starts before that conversation is had. I believe that everyone at some point in time with some regularity, they need to take a mental recap of what they do have, not what they don't have. Flip the script. We're used to looking at what other people have and saying, "Oh, I wish I could have that," or "Why don't I do that the way that person does it?" Instead of doing that, let's do a complete 180 and say, I'm fortunate that I have this. I'm happy that I have the ability to spend time with these people. I'm glad that I can go here and there with my family and friends. So before any conversations are even had, if that mindset is developed and cultivated, when these conversations come up, there's less of a chance of insecurity or envy and the feeling of a need for a one up, and more of one of contentment and just appreciation of whatever the other person is saying.
And that touches up a little bit on one of the other reasons we were talking about is that egocentric or that self-centered point of view. um when and I want to make sure that I'm clear about this. You are, if you are listening and you are aware that you do this is not a criticism against you. This is one of those components that we want to become aware of as gentlemen and as we grow as men, to try to become better at them. One thing that we try to do, and we work very hard at this in the Gentleman's Brotherhood, is to try to foster that judgment free zone in which we can have the conversations and the discussions that can shine a light on the deficiencies that we may have and be very productive and helpful in helping the individual overcome some of those shortcomings. Um, Clearly, we are imperfect as you know. Even hosting this show and having these conversations and trying to find and curate these discussions for you, we're not coming to you from a place of perfection. Like, we're not looking down at the people that are uh, struggling or dealing with this. This is something that we've gone through. Many of the things that we'll discuss are things that are part of our history of shortcomings that we might have overcome, some that we might be currently struggling with. But we try to be efficient in finding solutions for those things so that we can be better gentlemen. So if it stems from a point of egocentric thought, the one the main advice that I would have is to, whenever you engage in a conversation with someone with whom you want to have an impact on, someone upon whom you want to leave a positive um, impression, or someone who you love, someone who you care for, or someone who you want to keep in good spirits, or someone who you want to keep close, being less self-centered in the conversation is going to go a long way. Trying to focus on the other individual, and I'll let Tamesh give some examples of how to do that. The first one is to dig deeper. Right? Would you agree with that?
Dig deeper. That is one approach. Um, while you can't do that, I think that one of the best ways to handle that one up is acknowledgement and keep it moving. You acknowledge what they're saying and you make them feel the significance of it to them and for them, but you don't let them dwell on it, and you don't try to, in my opinion, one up them,
Mm.
because that just gets into a back and forth. And if there's anyone else there, they're watching a tennis match at that point. You acknowledge them. Oh wow, that's amazing. That's incredible. I'm so happy for you. And then you switch the topic, because that way you're not ignoring them. You're not giving them a feeling of being placated. They're getting acknowledged. They're feeling good about that. The awkwardness goes away, and now you can have a more productive conversation about something else.
Yeah, and
Unless
many times, go ahead.
unless they decide to play it up a little more and one up themselves.
Yes, which is possible. I've seen this happen. One thing that used to happen a lot to me when I was going out frequently to do art shows. I would have my paintings up on display, and inevitably the paintings would evoke questions. Sometimes there were some similar questions. People would see some of my surrealism style and they would ask, "Oh, do you know about Salvador Dali? Do you like Salvador Dali?" And they would start asking questions about Salvador Dali. And I'm a big fan of Salvador Dali, always have been. And one thing that people would ask very quite often is, "Have you been to Salvador Dali's museum in St. Petersburg?" It's just
Mhm.
about an hour and a half from where I live. Well, yes, not only have I been to Salvador Dali's museum in St. Petersburg, I've been to Salvador Dali's museum in Madrid, and I've been to Salvador Dali's house in Cadaqués in the coast of it's almost to France. It's so far north in Spain. There's nothing around it, by the way. So if you're going, eat before you go. There's no uh but I've caught myself in those situations where they tell me, "Oh, I've been to Salvador Dali's museum here," and there's a space for me to say, "Oh, yeah, I've been to his museum in Madrid, and I've been to his museum I've been to his house." But many times I found that it added nothing to the conversation. It almost presented me in an arrogant kind of, "Oh, you think that's impressive? I've been to his home and I've been to his home studio," and like, you know what I'm saying? So catching myself then and recognizing, is this a part of the story that is going to add value to the conversation? Or do I just not dig into it and start asking you questions? "Oh, yes, I've been to that museum. What did you think about it? Have you been since the last remodel? Do you go by yourself? Do you go with your family?" And you start asking questions that kind of uh, take the spotlight away from you and show them that you're genuinely interested in learning a little bit more about them, as opposed to showing them how much more you've done or how much better your knowledge is about X or Y. And of course, there's a balance to be reached there, because you don't want to necessarily just always hide your achievements or hide your travel experience or anything like that. That's not the intention. The thing is to have a balance. Perhaps the conversation goes in that way where they ask you, "Have you traveled to this place?" You're not going to hide the fact that you have traveled there, but what you want to be cautious is to not come across as like, "Oh, you think that's impressive?" Any interaction, if you could replace that, "Oh, you think that's impressive? Let me tell you about this," and then you totally ruin the conversation.
Absolutely.
All right, so we've discussed a little bit about insecurities, egocentric personality. What would you say would be a good response if you come across someone who is relentlessly um, one upping you in a conversation? Is there anything that you can do to actually mitigate um, that pattern?
The main thing that comes to mind, acknowledge it. At some point, say, I can't top that. What are they going to say at that point? They've won. They've felt superior. They've gotten that security. You say, I bow down, you win, and just keep it moving. I think that's the easiest way to mitigate that situation,
You could do that. I could imagine you could do that with a friend, perhaps, or someone really close to you, of course.
but not in a general.
Yeah. I was also thinking that if you come across someone who actually is constantly going to the next story, um, and sometimes you have a point. Let's say you're telling a story about something that happened, and before you finish telling them, before you fulfill the purpose of that phrase or that sentence, they start telling you about their experience. Now, of course, is a shortcoming in their part to not be able to have that equitable back and forth in a conversation. So this they seem to have a shortcoming there.
Mm,
Um, People are not always receptive to the constructive criticism in the moment. So one thing that you could do is try to regain control of the conversation, or at least try to bring back your purpose if it's still relevant to the conversation. And this might sound to some as a confrontational or a negative thing to do, but I'll give you a word choice, or I'll give you some examples so that you can at least envision how this can be done effectively. um, let's say, for example, I tell you, oh, you know what, i I just installed in my car this stereo, and the reason I'm telling you, side note, the reason I'm telling you is because I want to tell you about me subscribing to Sirius FM and getting 3 months free, for example. And then you're like, oh yeah, well, you know what, I just got my uh what is that called, the uh, uh, some system. I know nothing about car stereos, to be honest with you. I just bought the whole big screen for it, and I added this, and I added the rear view camera that it didn't have it, but I still want to tell you about the Sirius. You can say, oh, I want to go back to tell you about what I started telling you about the stereo, because I right now they're running a promotion where you can get 3 months free of Sirius Radio, and I thought that you might be interested in that. And now, not only did you come back to your final thoughts of that conversation, but you also made it about it being a benefit to them. um, it always happens when you're telling someone a story that is interesting, or a dream, or you're talking about a something that you just learned. You may have a purpose for bringing this up. You might have a reason for talking about it. And it can be rude if the other person is stopping you from finishing and one upping you. But there are subtle ways for you to actually um, shine a light on the interruption without saying, "Hey, are you going to let me finish my story?" Now, of course, be the opposite of what we want to achieve. Um, you can also say, "Oh, I want to get back to what I was telling you earlier, real quick, because I don't want you to miss blank." Or you can say, um, "Oh, before I forget,
Mm.
the reason I brought this up is because blank." And in a subtle way, there you're saying, "Before you rudely interrupted me," no, you're telling them, "Oh, there was a reason for me to tell you that, and here it is." Um, Ideally, they catch themselves. This doesn't always happen. There are people that are very, very set in their ways of one upping other people. And if you're not close enough to them, there's very little that you can do to sway their behavior without maybe tarnishing the relationship or affecting it. But if it's someone who for whom you care, um, and one very prime example is if you're raising children, you might have a first hand view of the children doing this constantly. Oh no, but mine is better because this, or let me tell you about this other thing. There, you have a vested interest in helping them adjust or preparing them for when they go out into the real world, that they're not that one guy who's always one upping everybody else. So, and again, doing it with courage and with courtesy is the ideal thing to pursue. Now, Tamesh, do you think it's possible for one to notice when one engages in this practice?
Themselves? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it goes back to the simple principle of think before you speak.
Mm,
Very easily, there's also the correlation to if you feel you're going to be upset about something that's about to be said or said, count to 10. Now, in active conversation, counting to 10 may not be realistic, but take 3 seconds and think to yourself, is what I'm about to say worth it?
mm.
will this have any benefit to this conversation, or is this just to make me feel better?
Mm,
And that, I think, will dictate whether you choose to continue with what you were about to say or just switch to an acknowledgement, say something on parallel, and move things along.
I love that. That's very, very good advice. Um, and I identify with that. I found myself, um, sometimes you're speaking with someone and it's almost inevitable for you to be thinking about what they're telling you, but also for you to be reminded of something to contribute to the conversation. Now, sometimes there is no direct reason for you to present whatever it is that you think about. It might be a self uh aggrandizing, am I saying that right? Self aggrandizing.
Hmm.
Kind of, it sounds like I'm translating a Spanish word in my mind before saying it. Or you're making yourself more important by saying it. Like there
Hmm.
might be no reason, it might not contribute positively to the experience. It might just be you looking for an excuse to say, "Hey, aren't you proud of me for doing this?" Or "Aren't you impressed that I received blank?" And there are times where it just doesn't fit the conversation. And ideally, if you find yourself going down that route where you can just ask yourself, like, would this be a good uh, supplement to this conversation, or will this derail the conversation? And I'm sure this has happened to you, because this is something that I've come across many times, where you think of something to contribute to the conversation, and the other person continues to speak, and then it gets to a point where you bringing that up no longer makes sense, because now we're on to a different topic, or we on too far into the conversation. It will be awkward to bring that up. So when you get that feeling, that's a very good indicator for you to say to yourself, is this still a valuable contribution to the conversation? And if the answer is like it adds if the answer is no, it adds nothing, then there's no reason to bring it up. That usually is a very good indicator that um, the conversations it's past that particular level. So as we reach the end of our time tonight speaking, I'm glad that we are having these conversations where we explore some things that could be of use to our listeners, but also good reminders and good lessons for us, because having conversations with other people can be one of the most valuable things that we do in a day. Just connecting eye to eye with someone, and respecting their presence and acknowledging their value in your life. That is one of the greatest things that we can do. We show people that we care when we actually give them our undivided attention. And sometimes that undivided attention requires us to perhaps put in a back burner all these uh oh yeah, I keep on thinking the Spanish word, self-aggrandizing. And whomever thinks of the right word that I'm thinking of, if I'm not saying it right, let me know. Uh, so these conversations, I think, help us become more aware, and be effective communicators, and really create those connections with people, and not take them for granted. So I know you and we've had many conversations in the past. You and I don't usually have controversial conversations. Like you and I are, we don't have too many of those discussions. But I don't feel like you're ever trying to one up me in the conversations. I don't feel it never gets awkward like that. So if can you think of any other advice for the gentleman listening, whenever they either come across an individual or catch themselves being that one up man?
take those 3 seconds, whether you're on the giving end or the receiving end, because however you respond, it's not just what the other person's hearing, it's what the other person is perceiving about you as well. So take all that into account because every word, every tone, every inflection, especially in a one up situation, it says a great deal about who you are. So take those seconds and reflect.
Excellent. Very good advice. And my parting words to the listeners would be, eh, approach conversations in an interested way. Try to come out learning something from that other individual with whom you're speaking. And if you catch them one upping you, that might be a good opportunity for you to open further doors and ask deeper questions about the event, the situation, and it perhaps may inform you more about why they are trying to bring this up. That might be that thing that reveals to you how important your validation is to them, and not appreciating that could be a loss on your part. So approach every conversation in an equitable way. Try to learn from the other individual as much as possible, and don't make it a one up contest where you're trying to show them how great you are, how much you know. Just go at it from an interested point of view where you want to learn, what do they know more of that they can provide you with? What are some of the experiences in their life that they can share with you and make you a better man or make you more knowledgeable about the world? So, Tamish, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank
I
you for
hope
having me.
it's always a pleasure to have you, and to the gentleman listening. Until next time, I wish you courage, courtesy, and balanced conversations.